For decades, one of the core assumptions of quantum mechanics has been that if parallel worlds exist, they are completely, totally, and forever separate. Well, this explainer is going to look at a research paper that proposes a theoretical way to actually test that fundamental barrier.
And this quote from the author, Maria Violaris, really gets to the heart of the established view. The idea was that the branches of the multiverse were sealed off from each other by the very laws of physics. That's the foundational assumption this work takes a very careful look at.
So to really get what's new here, think about the difference between just watching lightning strike two different trees from a distance versus actively flying a kite in that storm to interact with the electricity. The first is just passive observation. The second is controlled interaction. And this paper, well, it proposes a theoretical kite.
As you can see, this represents a pretty big shift in thinking. So to understand it properly, we need to be really precise about what this theory actually makes possible and what remains firmly in the realm of science fiction.
So here is our roadmap. We're going to start with the fundamental problem that made this whole thing seem impossible in the first place. Then we'll walk through the exact protocol the researchers proposed. After that, we'll look at the results of that protocol, and finally, we'll lay out the very, very strict rules and limits that govern this idea.
All right, so first things first, we need to understand the barrier that supposedly keeps these quantum branches separate forever. It's the whole reason this was considered impossible for so long. And that barrier has a name: decoherence. In simple terms, this is the process that takes a single quantum reality and splits it into what look like multiple, isolated, parallel worlds. It effectively slams the door shut between the branches, and that's why communication between them was thought to be a non-starter.
So here's the crucial point. Scientists could see the results of this branching in their experiments. They could see the evidence that these different worlds existed, at least mathematically, but they couldn't reach in and interact with them. Decoherence was just too complete. They could watch the storm, but they had no way to fly the kite.
Okay, so how do you get past that wall? Well, this is where the paper introduces its theoretical protocol to do just that. It's based on a classic thought experiment called Wigner's friend, but it's been adapted here to allow for interaction. Now, the core idea here is, well, it's pretty clever. You don't try to send a message from one branch to another, like a letter in the mail. Instead, you physically swap the observers. The message gets written in one branch, and then the observer holding it gets swapped into the other branch to deliver it.
So let's break down exactly how this would work, step by step. First, you create a superposition. This splits an observer, called the friend, into two different versions across two branches. Second, in just one of those branches, that friend writes a message. Third, and this is absolutely critical, the friend's memory of ever having written that message is perfectly erased. And finally, fourth, an outside controller, Wigner, performs a special operation that swaps the two friends between their branches.
And this right here, this is the real innovation. It's not some clumsy all-or-nothing swap. It's a precise, almost surgical operation. Wigner, the external observer, swaps everything that makes the two friends different, their location, their quantum state, but deliberately leaves the piece of paper with the message on it untouched.
Okay, so after Wigner does all that, create, write, erase, and swap, what's the final state of the system? What actually changed?
According to the math in the paper, the result is a clean transfer. Friend 0, who never wrote a single thing, now finds a message sitting on their piece of paper. And that message, it was created by their counterpart in a parallel world.
Now, the reason this whole thing is even possible is that Wigner's operation swaps the containers of the message, the friends themselves, not the message. Wigner never has to know what the message says. The operation works no matter what's written down, and that's why it doesn't break the fundamental rules of quantum theory.
Okay, now for the reality check. Because in science, what something can't do is often just as important as what it can. So let's be crystal clear about what this protocol is not. So, let's start with the most important boundary condition. What happens if you skip that third step? What if the memory erasure doesn't happen?
It fails. The protocol completely falls apart. If the memory of writing the message is still there, it's quantumly tangled up with the friend's state. When you try the swap, you don't get a clean transfer. You get a weird, paradoxical quantum muddle of both friends. You don't get a message, you just get noise.
So, to be perfectly clear, the paper proves these three hard limits are completely non-negotiable. 1. The sender can't have any memory of sending the message.
2. Wigner can't perform a swap that somehow preserves the memory, not without knowing the message in advance, which breaks the rules. And 3. Wigner can't cheat by changing the probabilities to make the message branch more likely to appear.
Okay, so let's circle all the way back to our opening question. Based strictly on what the authors show, what can we now say about communication between quantum branches?
Before this paper, the answer was pretty simple. Branches are fundamentally isolated. It's impossible. After this paper, the answer is, well, it's that a theoretical path for this kind of information transfer does exist, but only under these incredibly specific and restrictive lab conditions. The boundary has shifted from impossible to theoretically possible, but with huge caveats.
But here's where it gets really mind-bending. Imagine the message that appears isn't just hello, but it's the proof to a brand new mathematical theorem. According to this protocol, the only way that new knowledge could appear from nowhere is if friend 1 is a real, thinking, knowledge-creating person in another universe, and that transforms this whole thing from a thought experiment into a potential test for the physical reality of the multiverse itself.
So, to be clear, this result isn't a blueprint for a multiverse telephone. What it is a new, precise theoretical tool. It's a new kind of kite that lets us, at least in theory, move from passive observation to active interaction, and to probe that very fine line between parallel worlds to ask much deeper questions about the fundamental nature of reality.